remove.
Yeah.
No worries.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Cellar Folly podcast. This is a special one for us today. We're interviewing Sarah Kennedy from McConnell's Irish Whiskey. And I'm so happy that you're here. This has been a few months in the making. How are you doing? I know 2022 was crazy for you, right?
Yeah, 2022 was a bit of a blur. I think I was on 35 different flights last year. It was just pretty crazy. And this year is looking even more crazy, but not as much travel, but definitely here in Belfast because we have lots going on, which we'll get into pretty soon.
Oh yeah.
But I'm good.
Oh, yeah.
I had a nice rest over the Christmas break, and January's kind of been fast paced and right back into it. So good to go.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
January feels kind of like a blur already. Maybe it's just an extension of 2022, but it's already the 20th.
I know, right?
It's going
it's
quick.
crazy. It's
going really quick.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we want to talk to you about your role in McConnell's and also McConnell's as a company as well. But let's start with you. How did you first partner up with McConnell's? Was it pretty quick after the relaunch of McConnell's, or were you there from the beginning since the relaunch?
Well, it's quite funny because I'm actually employee number one. Like I'm the longest standing employee of McConnell's, of Belfast Distillery Company that owns the brand McConnell's Irish Whiskey. And I started with the company in 2020. So the product was launched in 2020, but before that there was a lot of investment capital, like trying to raise capital, trying to find the right brand messaging. And the launch happened actually before I started, because we do have a board of directors and we do have investors and we do have other distributors and importers that have helped us out in the beginning. Specifically in America is Kaneka Brands, who is our importer, but also just very much a sister company of ours, and they work really hard to promote the McConnell's Irish Whiskey brand in America. But before that, really, I worked in hospitality as a student, as an undergrad, and I studied in a business and predominantly marketing, and always really wanted to work in the hospitality world or in the creative world or working in marketing in terms of hospitality and spirits. But then I actually fell into a finance role for around 5 years, which is completely opposite of
yeah, right. Yeah.
A little different.
Yeah, but it gives you a little bit of discipline and it gives you more insight into other areas of business. And it gives you, I specifically worked in the insurance industry where we created insurance programs for a number of different types of businesses that were manufacturing, transportation, hospitality, and distilling. That the brokerage that I worked for actually specialized in insuring local distilleries. And so, you guys know yourself, like there's lots in the background that goes on with a distillery and with, the legal side of things and duty and taxes and all sorts and approvals. So, behind any distillery, there's many, financial institutes, there's all sorts of funding as well. And I was slightly involved in the project. And so I was aware of it for a long time. The project has sort of been on the cards since 2016. And I was actually at the launch of the McConnell's brand in Belfast. That's where I'm from, and that's where the brand is from. And I was invited along, and I got into a number of conversations with some of the investors, some of the stakeholders, and then also the board of directors. And I had some interesting conversations with them. And very quickly, a few months later, I got into more serious conversations with them about actually coming to work for the company. I think they just realized how obsessed I was with Belfast and also with the concept of a distillery in Belfast and the history, and all of it was just so interesting to me. And it wasn't for a few months later that I actually came on board and took the role. And I started as a brand ambassador. And what is a brand ambassador? People ask me that all the time. The brand ambassador role is always evolving, and I don't think any two brand ambassadors are the same.
Right.
Because I was technically for a while the only employee, as well as and we had one other employee at the time who's since moved on. and he was working on the actual getting the whiskey into the bottle and the labels and all of those things. And now he's actually moved into the other side of the business where he's consulting for us to build a distillery. So he's still very heavily involved in the project. But my role was I wore many hats. I did everything from social media, marketing. I did the communications with the distributors. I did brand education. I delved into the history. I wrote the tasting notes. I did a lot in the company. And now we're a team of 7 and there's more hands on deck to do these things. You know, we have just hired our head distiller. We also have our head of supply chain who looks after labels and bottling and cask selection and getting the product on the shelves. We have a commercial manager who deals with global sales. We have our CEO who deals with everything really. You know, he oversees a lot. And we also have our financial director, and we're all local. We're all based in Belfast City, and we're all local people really just wanting the McConnell's brand to succeed. So last year I was promoted to the brand manager for McConnell's, which I was very excited about because it meant that my role was more defined. And I'm still a brand ambassador. I'll always be a brand ambassador for McConnell's. I absolutely love the brand, but it's more focused on building the brand, activations, marketing, all the communications, PR, social media. So my job is a little bit more targeted. You know, it's not like I'm doing office management anymore or IT. You know, we have all of these different people in to help us do that. So the business has just evolved massively, and with that my role has very much evolved.
That's awesome. Great. Another question I have for you, just because you kind of seems like fell into, I mean, at least with a distillery, were you it seems like, just judging by your social media, you're a whiskey drinker. Before that, were you? Like, I mean, I think I don't know if it's okay.
You into the whiskey enthusiast you are today?
You mentioned that you worked on tasting notes and all these other things. Like, were you like, did this really open your mind up to whiskey, or was this something that you've always enjoyed before? I want to say, just because we're from America, it feels like if you live in Ireland, you like whiskey, but I don't know if that's always the case. You know what I mean?
It might just be a stereotype.
It is an interesting question, and I get asked it a lot. And the answer, obviously, I was very interested in whiskey as a consumer. And also as I worked in the industry as a bartender for 5 years, so I was aware of the different styles of whiskey. And back then, even, you know, like, giving my age away, but that was 10 years ago now. So it was like the industry was not what it is today. There wasn't as many brands on the shelf. There wasn't as much experimentation, and you know, there wasn't that love and growth of Irish whiskey among the general consumers as there is now. There was always people who were massively interested in Irish whiskey, and they've been in the industry for so many years and really held up the industry. But there wasn't the same spotlight on Irish whiskey whenever I was working in the hospitality trade. So yes, I do. I follow a gluten-free diet. I don't drink beers. There's a number of things that I don't drink just out of choice. Spirits are my go-to. So I do like rum. I like gin, but whiskey is just right up there because of where I'm from, and also because growing up, that's, you know, what my father drank. You know, people like to have a whiskey to celebrate, to have a toast. So I was always interested in whiskey, and I've always been really quite in tune with my palate and you know, my sensory and my senses. You know, so whenever I taste whiskey, that's the best thing about it. It's not drinking whiskey for consumption. It's drinking whiskey because you're enjoying it and you're having a conversation, or you're finding something really interesting out about it. I'm also not afraid to talk, so I'm very vocal about what I'm getting in my glass, whether someone thinks I'm way off or not. But usually I'm pretty spot on or in the direction. So especially when you spend a lot of time with whiskey, and you spend a lot of time with a certain whiskey, and you have that time and it's your job, you do tend to be able to identify flavors a little bit better.
Yeah. I mean, that's how Cellarman's Folly got started. We started just, I had like a little tiny home bar in my basement. That's where Cellar came from. And then like we just spent a lot of time with whiskey, and it was not about the whiskey at first. It was about us just having that conversation.
Yeah.
And then we just dive into all these whiskeys, and we're like, oh, okay. And then it just blew up from there. But that's a very similar.
Yeah. Similar backstory there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We all come from different ways. You could come out of university straight into a graduate program that you're straight into working with distilleries, or you could literally come into it, later in life whenever you're retiring. You don't know when you're going to get interested in the world, but once you do, you go down this rabbit hole of the whiskey world and all of the different categories and styles of whiskey. So
it's definitely a rabbit hole. That's true.
Oh yeah. We're about 200 feet down the rabbit hole at this point. I don't know how deep it is, but we're pretty deep.
Yeah. It's pretty rough in the bank account at some stages sometimes, but it's worth it,
Oh yeah, definitely is. It definitely is, especially because we just got, within the last 6 weeks, our final kind of legal requirement to actually be fully operational and everything. So yeah, getting to that end of the mile for us makes all of it worth it.
Of course.
Even with all the headaches involved with, the legal side of things and regulatory side of things, that is not fun. But now that we're here, it is really fun. Yeah. Now, speaking of like some interesting backstory, maybe we should have touched on this first, because you mentioned the relaunch of the brand.
Yeah.
Now, we obviously know this because we were familiar with the brand, but the people viewing at home, they may not know. So could you give us a little bit more like background as far as like where McConnell's came from, why they had to relaunch, and what exactly happened with the company?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
How long have you got? So if you do fast forward it back, right back to the early days of McConnell's. So McConnell's was actually established in 1776.
Right.
And 1776 is pretty significant for you guys. It's a significant date.
It's a noteworthy year. Yeah.
But it shows you how interesting Belfast was in terms of industry and branding. So we have a brand that was established in 1776 that were at that stage small scale distillation, and also spirit dealers and grocers. So spirit dealers and grocers would have been quite common in Ireland and in Belfast in that era. So if you bring it right back to the beginning, it was a lot smaller than what the brand actually turned into in the future. So fast forward it maybe 50, 60 years, there was one of the McConnell's, which was Hugh McConnell, married a lady, Eleanor, and they had two sons. They had John and James McConnell, who are JJ McConnell. And they were born sort of in the early 1800s, but Hugh McConnell passed away pretty untimely. And left Eleanor, their mother, with two toddlers. So John and James were only toddlers at the time. But she actually ran the business for 20 years as a female in old Ireland. And she was noted as a rectifying distiller. So for a female to be noted as a rectifying distiller in the 1800s is pretty incredible. I love that story. But then whenever both her sons grew up and got into their 20s, they took over the business. And they actually built the distillery in Belfast, and they built quite a large facility that was both a distillery and a brewery. And they used the Cromac water. So the Cromac water was actually really there was a lot of pride around the Cromac water of Belfast, because I don't know if you know this, but ginger ale, the original recipe for ginger ale was created in Belfast.
I did not know that. That's cool.
So ginger ale was like shipped across the world, and using the Cromac water in ginger ale was just very prestigious. They were very proud of using the Cromac water in their Cromac distillery. So they were huge in the export market, JJ McConnell's. They shipped it all over the world, but their biggest market, of course, was the US. And they shipped probably the majority of their product into the export market. They also, shipped some of their beers as well, and their products. They also had a liqueur called Old Crow. And if you bring it to like sort of fast forward maybe to the early 1900s, that's whenever McConnell started falling on hard times. Number one, the McConnell's family sort of died out because John and James died quite young, and John only had females. He only had girls who didn't want to take over the business. So then, early 1900s, it was the first time that there was a non-McConnell taking over the business as MD. Not that that was any trouble, because the brand was soaring. It was a really Irish whiskey was booming, and Belfast was the biggest producer of Irish whiskey during that time. So,
gotcha.
They then had this unfortunate number of events. Basically, they had a fire in their distillery in 1907, and then it wasn't too much damage, thankfully. But then in 1909, they had a huge fire. It destroyed one of their bonded warehouses, which was right in the city centre of Belfast, in Dunbar Street. And it destroyed 500,000 gallons of Irish whiskey. So at the time, it was almost £250,000 lost to them, which was a lot of money back then. But they were really positive about this, and they went into the media and they publicized this in many newspapers to say, you know, the J.J. McConnell's distillery has more than one bonded warehouse, and we have lots of whiskey and we're going to continue going. And they did. They kept trading up until the mid-1930s. They were distilling too. And they really closed their doors because they were so heavily affected by prohibition. Prohibition in America just meant that their business was massively impacted. And then they stopped distilling, and then they finally wind up and closed their doors in 1948. So really for almost 90 years now, there's been no distilling going on for J.J. McConnell's. There has been virtually no distilling going on in Belfast. There hasn't been a distillery now in Belfast in 90 years. And it's crazy to say that, because at one stage Belfast was the biggest producer of Irish whiskey on the island. So it's quite sad, and it's a whole industry that just went into decline. And you can imagine how many jobs, skill sets that just had to move on into other industries. But on top of that, you know, Belfast went through its troubled times, and there was like political unrest for many years, right up until the 90s. So and so you bring that into the modern day. The brand was relaunched in 2020. The whole concept was thought out in 2016. And what we're doing is something quite exceptional, actually. If you see behind me, there's some renders. So these renders are where our distillery is going to be. And we're opening our doors in October fingers crossed, the end of October this year. But we're all set. We're on schedule in terms of our building work. But we're actually putting our distillery into an old Victorian building in Belfast. And to do that is really difficult, to try to get approvals in place, because you need to keep the structural integrity of any building.
Historical significance. Yep.
Exactly. Yep. But it's not just any building, it's an old Victorian prison. So we're putting a distillery into a prison setting, which from our research, I think is the first legal distillery in a prison setting. And
that's amazing.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah.
And it's such a class building. It only closed its doors in 1996 after the ceasefire and after the troubles were ending. And it did hold political prisoners. It held prisoners from the famine, the suffragette movement, your everyday common criminals as well. But really it was a very significant building. There was executions happened there, predominantly hangings. Actually the last public execution in the UK was done in the Crumlin Road jail, and it was in the 60s. So it's absolutely terrifying when you think about it. Grizzly. And it's hanging as well. It's if you go and do the jail tour, which will still operate, there'll still be a tour of one of the wings of the jail that will go into the history of the prison. But we're opening a wing, the A wing, that is going to be devoted to whiskey distilling. And we can't, like you can see in this render, that we have to keep the staircase, we have to keep the three layers of the prison, but we can change a lot. Like we knocked the cells in because the cells were so tiny. We've knocked the cells through and retained the walls. We have to put pot stills in there on a massive boiler, because we have a distillery. It will be around 500,000 LPAs a year capacity.
Wow. That's
And we'll be putting pot stills in through the roof because we can't take any walls out. We can't touch anything about the prison. So we're going to get a massive crane in the middle of the city in Belfast, and you'll see 3 pot stills being lowered through the roof. So
oh my God.
Wow.
Please post that. Please post that on social media.
I definitely want to see the videos of that.
We have big plans. We have big plans to definitely show the world what that will look like. Because
that's
really
crazy.
Excited for that. Yeah.
Are you keeping some of the cells just so like as a, just
to show people?
Cool, yeah.
Well, I mean, there will be the jail tour will still be there, and the cells are all still intact. It's like if you go into this prison, this side of the jail, we're going to be a whiskey distillery. There's going to be floor markings, so it will show you where the cells are.
Oh, that's cool.
And so you'll still know that this was a jail. We're still going to keep the references to it, and we'll still talk about it. But really, the jail tour is there for people to learn about the history of the jail, whereas we're going to specifically educate people on whiskey distilling.
Of course,
And not only that, we're going to have like a blending room where you can learn how to blend your own whiskeys and realize how important the blended category is for the Irish whiskey world.
Oh yeah.
Because not a lot of people know about the individual categories, the single grain, single malt, pot still Irish whiskey, and then the blended category. That when you use a blend, you can create some fantastic whiskeys. And then also we'll have a cocktail experience masterclass because we love the fact that with whiskey, especially with our blends and our core range, you should really promote your whiskey to be enjoyed. And I think that there's no real right way to drink Irish whiskey. Like, I love my whiskey neat. I love it at room temperature. I'm really specific. But when I'm out having fun with my friends or in a social situation, cocktails are brilliant.
Exactly.
Of course.
Yeah.
So having that cocktail experience will be fab as well. So it's really exciting for us, and it's as I said, it's 500,000 LPAs, which is more than we could actually sell at the minute, so and then on top of that, we will have a fully operational visitor experience, which is tapping into the travel and tourism industry as well as the spirits industry. So very excited.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to, because it's a good segue to one of Colin's questions about cocktails, but I do want to just state that the similarities between the companies right now, I think are wild, just because just talking about the history of your town and stuff, and how McConnell's hasn't been around since essentially in the United States Prohibition. And in our town, Auburn, we're the first distillery since Prohibition, and we're a big prison town too. Like, it is like massive, like huge prison that's still operational right now. And just the similarities between the two companies and the areas of stuff. While you're a very, 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 very historic, Belfast is very, very historic. Auburn is also very, very historic for the United States. Harriet Tubman was here. Abraham Lincoln, Secretary of State. William H. Seward was here. He was actually supposed to be assassinated with it. I don't know. It's just like that. It's very. I just
there's a lot of parallels there. I mean, granted, we know we are much smaller and we don't have the backstory from 200 years ago. If you take that out of the mix, it's very simple.
So having your brand identity and understanding, the origins of where you're from and where you're putting your distillery is really important.
Of course.
Because it's made for. It's not been an easy ride. Launching a brand is very difficult. We had one product for almost 2 years, and now we have 2, and we'll potentially have 3 by the end of the year. So it's
good to know.
It's a growing thing, but like having that story and that history and that heritage meant that I could go on a podcast and talk about one whiskey and not just talk about a whiskey. And then I'm like, what else do I talk about? So there is a lot going on. There's a massive future for McConnell's and a past. And we kind of want to see those 90 years as in 150 years, like people won't even, they'll look back and think of that 90 years like it didn't happen. It was like McConnell's has always been here from the 1700s. And that was just a little hiccup because the Irish whiskey industry went into decline. And it wasn't just McConnell's, it was the entire industry went into decline. So there's a huge renaissance of Irish whiskey. And I don't know whether, you probably do know this because you guys know about whiskey like more than me probably. And with Irish whiskey, you know, there's been a huge renaissance in distilleries themselves because years ago, you know, there was thousands of distilleries, micro distilleries, and it was a massive industry. And then we went down to 2, and then there was 3, and then, you know, there was only a handful of distilleries for a very long time. And now there's 45 distilleries with 47 will be, I think, number 47. And that doesn't sound like lots in comparison to 2,000 like distilleries, but we're talking huge distilleries. There's so many of them now. And there's also a lot of distilleries in regions, so we could nearly start seeing some types of trends coming out of different regions of Ireland. So it's very exciting to see our brand grow, but also the industry grow as a whole.
Oh yeah, everybody wins if everybody's able to do that at the same time. You know, obviously there's more competition with that, which is you know one thing, but it is really nice to see the whole industry be able to bounce back.
Yeah. In our area, it's on. They passed some laws, and I think in 2015 that it's just cheaper for New York State to get your licensing if you use like all New York State ingredients and these sort of things. So since then. And we're part of that. We've seen that huge thing too, but it's less of a competition, more of a community. Everyone's very, very, you know, always willing to help, start your company and stuff like that. It's been really fun to like talk to these people. So it's great.
Yeah, definitely. Now, Nick, you put a pin in the whole cocktail thing. That was something I was really curious about after Sarah mentioned, you know, oh yeah, actually I'm a whiskey drinker. So Sarah, as Nick mentioned, kind of like early in the chat, you know, one thing that we do are cocktail classes with all of our subscribers. And so every single month we will make a new whiskey cocktail using one of our products. And sometimes they're traditional whiskey cocktails. Sometimes they're completely different drinks that we will substitute something to add whiskey and put our own twist on it.
Yeah.
So if you're going out, you know, you get a cocktail, but you're actually using McConnell's. Like, are there like go-to recipes that people will use McConnell's for to make like a classic drink with, or like what's the most popular thing that comes to mind?
Well, it's 4 signature serves. We do have signature serves that are probably put together for the consumer to make at home. So they're very simple. You know, we have our own take on our old fashioned.
Irish old fashioned.
It's a Belfast old fashioned. It's just we use orange bitters and Angostura bitters in the cocktail, and it's made with your standard, you know, the orange, but we put Irish whiskey instead of the bourbon in. You know, it's a lighter, crisper, more of a summery type citrus note old fashioned than, you know, like the darker Demerara sugar with the cherries and the bourbon. It's just more of a winter drink to me. Whereas the Belfast old fashioned is just a little bit lighter.
Yeah, it's more refreshing, it sounds like.
It is, and the recipes are amazing. They're simple, easy to put together. And then we also have a Dunbar Street sour, which is our take on a whiskey sour, but it's made with elderflower, lime, and it's also made with a drop of salt. It's almost like an Irish whiskey margarita, but it is a sour. That's what we've aimed it at, because it's not margarita. It's definitely not a margarita because it doesn't have tequila in it.
Right. We have made our own margaritas. We do them very well.
we call them a burberita.
But it is fab. You should definitely try that. Cool. Obviously, the Irish coffee, the most classic cocktail that there is out there. People don't think of the Irish coffee when you think of a cocktail. They're starting to more, definitely. But it is just amazing the way, you know, you can have things at the right temperature, the right amounts, the right consistency, and it just makes for such an amazing drink. And you should never mix your Irish coffee, just sip it through the cream, because it's just fab. And then we also have like other flavors that mixologists tend to work with. And citrus and elderflower floral notes work really well with a 5-year-old, as well as coffee. And then banana works really well too.
Oh,
and then whenever you take the sherry cask, which is our second release, which has darker notes in it, like darker fruits, demerara, also a little bit of a leathery musky note on it, people tend to go down the coffee and dark chocolate type notes. Like I've had it in a espresso martini, an Irish espresso martini, and it's fab. But I've also had the sherry cask in a highball. So the highball is also really popular in the Irish whiskey world, like with like homemade cordials and ginger spiciness that comes through, and then also just the refreshing citrus and soda water. So there's so much you can do with cocktails. Our brand ambassador, Connor Fitzpatrick, is really interesting because he specifically writes cocktail menus for our bars and restaurants that we work with.
Oh, that's cool.
Really is exceptional at cocktails, and he worked in as a mixologist. He doesn't like that word, me calling him a mixologist, because he just is self-depreciating and he says he's not a mixologist, but
yeah, it's a pretentious term. I don't think anybody wants to be called it. Yeah.
I know.
But he works, it's almost like watching him put something together, and the way he like macerates orange peels and sugar overnight and all. He puts a lot of time and effort into making his own little tinctures, and he's just fab. And so he specifically writes cocktails for bars, and which people pay quite a premium for these days.
Oh yeah.
And he works with them on and it helps us to bring McConnell's into the bars and restaurants, and for the bartenders to know our spirit, and to be able to understand what pairs well with it.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm gonna try all of those things. Also, I can't find the sherry cask like in my area. McConnell's is everywhere, but I'm having a hard time trying to find the sherry one, because I've been drinking McConnell's now for over a year, and every time I see it, one of the things I had to ask too was I don't like to judge like a book by its cover, but I will not judge, but I will choose my whiskey that I've never heard of before by their bottle, by their label, just because it looks cool. And McConnell's has the most iconic, in my opinion, bottle I have ever seen. Do you know the process behind picking the bottle type and shape and the glass and stuff behind that?
That's a really interesting one, because you can tell, like, I don't even have but the bottle's right behind me here.
It's so cool looking. Like, I first bought your bottle because of the shape of the bottle. I'm like, this is wild.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just because we're in the industry and we had to go and pick out different types of bottles and different types of labels. And I mean, just the
we know what goes into that.
Yeah, a lot.
This is a lot.
And even glass density and everything.
I know.
The bottle, and it's heavy, and shipping a heavy bottle, lots comes with it. The cork as well it's a natural cork, very detailed.
Yes, so, I wanted to compliment. I don't have a question about it. I just wanted to compliment the sound the cork makes when you pull it out of the bottle is the most. Like, it just sounds so good. I'm like, I will drink this whole bottle if I keep making that cork sound. Like, it's so good. It's like so like. I don't know, when you it's very refreshing. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I get it. I agree. But the bottle is very interesting. It was actually designed by Stranger and Stranger. So they put a lot of time and effort into it, but obviously with the help of our concept, because it's got a lot of history on this bottle. So one thing I love about McConnell's is the heritage and the history. And one of the interesting things about the original McConnell's brand is that on their labels, they had these little extracts of analysis, and it was basically recommendations. And so the recommendations were by doctors. So doctors recommended the McConnell's brand back in the 1800s, which is fab, because that's such a cool little bit of Irish history, because you would not get doctors recommending you drink whiskey now.
Not today.
But back in history, doctors used to write scripts, like prescriptions for like your settling colds, flus, all sorts. But fast forward now to us launching the product, we couldn't put those little recommendations on the bottle because one, those guys aren't alive anymore and they can't stand by their statements. And the other thing is that we couldn't have doctors recommending a whiskey. So what we did was
you can't have a pediatrician giving whiskey to a child. That just wouldn't
no,
fly. No,
you can't be doing that. So as a way to honor that, the bottle is actually shaped like a pill capsule. So it's got like the shape of it like a pill. So that's why there's that long sort of shape with the indent in the middle. And then the badge on the bottle, the Belfast badge, is
so cool.
A nod to the docks of Belfast is very famous for shipbuilding. And more prominently, we built the Titanic. Now, we always do celebrate this ship that sank, which is crazy, but at the same time, it was a beautiful, like, amazing, breathtaking ship that has so much history. And, like, it shouldn't have really sank. The only reason it sank is because it hit an iceberg. But we built the Titanic. So shipbuilding is a massive part of Belfast history. So we put the badge on there to honor the docks.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And then we also have the little ribbed bottom of the bottle. If you whenever I was in New York there, I noticed it everywhere, that in the little snugs in bars and old style bars, there would have been like opaque glass so that it gave you privacy.
Yeah.
So in a lot of the bars back here in Ireland would have these little booths. So it's just kind of replicated from like old style bars.
That's so cool.
Old style snugs and booths. And then the bottle itself has the Harp of Erin on it here, which is a big part of our trademark, which is the old symbol of Ireland. And so it's lots of history on it because this label itself was very, very similar to the label that was back in the 1800s. So we've changed very little about the label design, and it's quite simple and traditional.
Yep.
And with our brand is quite contemporary and modern. So it kind of is like modern times and contemporary lifestyle in Belfast meets the history of Belfast and old Belfast, and they kind of come together. So yeah, there's just lots of elements of that bottle that are steeped in history. And one of the probably most prominent things that I get asked for on a weekly basis is that why do we not have E in our whiskey? Because with Irish whiskey, it's spelt with an E. And we don't spell it with an E. And the reason for that is because I've told you this whole story of heritage and history. And the E in Irish whiskey was actually added in the 1800s.
I didn't know that. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so previous to that, like the term Irish whiskey, comes from the Latin aqua vitae, which means water of life. And then that turned into Ishkabaha. So Ishkabaha is Irish, in the Irish language, means water of life. And so Ishkabaha, over time, I don't know exactly, but like Ishki turned into like Ishkabaha.
Yeah, I can see that.
Then turned into whiskey.
Yeah.
And it's a Celtic term because also in Scotland as well, it's whiskey. And it was always whiskey without the E.
Yeah.
But that was added by, we think, now we don't know for sure, but we think that Dublin Distillery started to add the E, specifically in the city of Dublin, to differentiate themselves from the Scotch whiskey market, which was starting to grow. Yeah. And the Scotch whiskey market was starting to grow because they invented an efficient way of making whiskey, which was the column still. So the Kofi still. And in Ireland, we didn't adopt that straight away. Like we do use it now for our grain whiskey production, but we didn't adopt that. And we would have had ads, and the McConnell's brand had an ad that said pot stills only. So we used pot still only. So we never actually got a chance to adopt that E. It never made its way up to Belfast on time for McConnell's closing its doors.
Right.
So what we did when we brought the brand back was to keep the heritage of McConnell's and try not to change it.
Definitely. Yeah, that makes the most sense.
It's a great little nod. See, I always thought that the E was what was the term that was like just a common thing people would say. It's like if your country has an E in its name, then you have an E in your whiskey.
Yeah.
Like United States, like most whiskeys here have it. Canada doesn't, so they don't use it. Ireland does, so you do use it.
Scotland
Japan doesn't. So Scotland doesn't.
That's a good observation. I never even thought of that, but but I mean, a lot of like the American market, the bourbon market would tend to go with the E.
Yeah.
And that's because
there will be outrage if you see it without the E in the US.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, there is sometimes outrage. I sometimes do get outraged, but when I tell them the story, they fully understand it because there's no law in the technical file that says that we have to. It says with or without the E. It says both. Because if you look at all the old memorabilia and mirrors and little trinkets, all of the distilleries, especially up north, didn't have an E there. And McConnell's was one of them, and you'll actually be able to see, and we didn't change this font and this with the E or without the E. So
awesome.
Yeah,
it worked out great.
Anything, it makes for a really nice talking point while you're enjoying.
It does, yeah. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I just have a couple of quick final questions here. Colin, I don't know if you have anything else.
I'm good. We've answered. I mean, you've actually answered almost everything just by talking. Don't even have to ask the questions most of the time.
Right. So my question is, what's coming up in the future? Obviously, you're building the distillery right now. We talked a lot about that, but you also mentioned that there may be a third product by the end of the year. Can you talk about it? And if so, what can we expect from McConnell's?
Well, we're focusing on innovation. Like we had focused more on trying to build our brand and build the core range of the products. And then we started, our first chance at innovation was the sherry cask finish, which you're saying you can't find, but that's because the first batch was done in a batch and it was quite small, but we have just shipped product there to the US again, the second batch.
Good.
And that should be on your shelves pretty quickly. Hopefully you start to get it on a regular basis.
Yeah. I can't wait I love sherry finish stuff. So I'm very excited to try that.
Yeah, it's exceptional. It's Oloroso sherry cask that we use, that we import in from Spain, from Portugal, that is sourced from Spain. And they're, real punchy characteristics of what you're going to find in an Oloroso sherry cask, almost a musky tobacco note with dark chocolate and cherries, figs, and it's just
such a good
beautiful
combination.
And it's really affordable too. It's really reasonably priced. And then whenever we're thinking of innovation, we're going to be bringing out some single malts in the future. And that's because our focus is on whiskey. So we're predominantly focusing on whiskeys and bringing whiskeys to the market and whiskey production. So I know that there is a lot of distilleries out there that, would be bringing out gins and vodka and delving into other spirits, but our brand goal is to focus on whiskey. So we do have some aged malts that we have just sitting there waiting to be
waiting.
We got some. Yeah, you got some stuff ready.
But I can't really say much more about it, guys. But it's just as soon as we can talk about it, I'm sure you'll know, because I'll just scream it from the rooftop somewhere.
That's great.
You're saying we'll have to just keep on the lookout, and check out social media, and then
just keep following us, because we're just fast growing. We doubled our business last year. We doubled our team last year. We broke ground on the distillery. This time next year we're going to be 50 employees, which is awesome. Huge.
That's huge. That's amazing. Now for do you like with you said Belfast Distilling, is there any other brands that they're working on, or is McConnell's their number one product right now?
So we're focusing on McConnell's. So it's going to be called, the distillery will be called the J&J McConnell's Distillery and Visitor Experience.
Cool.
So it's the old Cromac Distillery was the J.J. McConnell's Distillery, and then it was called the Cromac Distillery. So we're obviously not in that area anymore. We've moved the distillery, but we're still focusing on the J.J. McConnell's Distillery, which is going to be producing McConnell's Irish whiskey. So we're focusing on the McConnell's brand. I'm not saying never say never, but I would say for now, it's definitely focusing on McConnell's.
Okay. Yeah, it's we're kind of going through a whole branding thing ourselves right now, and we're like, oh, okay, well, we'll have this name, but also another name, and then we weren't sure if Belfast had another gin distillery or another, eventually maybe, but that always kind of leaves it open to that, eventually down the line.
There actually there is more distilleries in concept for Belfast. It's just that there isn't any at the minute, so it's changing. And there may be other brands out there that are doing it, or other companies that are going to do it. But in terms of our specific Belfast Distillery Company, who own the McConnell's brand.
Right.
They're focusing on the JJ McConnell's distillery and visitor experience, and the McConnell's Irish whiskey brand.
Yeah. Great.
Got it.
Awesome.
I guess one last thing to wrap up, and I don't know if it was actually stated. When is the estimated time when the distillery is going to open?
So we're hoping for the end of October. The actual physical works, the structural works, if you say, are going to be finished around July, August. And we could potentially be commissioning our stills around August time. So, but the actual fit out of the experience and the tour and making it look how this stunning way behind me, it's going to take a few months, and it all depends on that. But we're aiming for the end of October 23, so we will be open this year.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, I'm ready to book my plane ticket now. So.
Yeah, I'm looking at flights.
That's why I'm asking.
I'm gonna go second week of November. That's where I'm going.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
It's really not much. Like the amount of times I traveled back and forth from the US now, I feel like it's only a jump across the pond. Yeah. There's so many direct flights nowadays. So straight into Dublin.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to it. We'll definitely visit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for taking the time and talking to us. And it was really, really cool to get to know more about McConnell's and Belfast in general. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
no bother at all. And enjoy your weekend, guys. Happy Friday.
Yeah,
Happy
you too.
Friday.
Happy Friday.
All right.
A few more hours until happy hour, but I'll make it there.
Okay, well, I'll see you soon. Bye, guys.
All right. Thanks, Ned. Thank you.
Thank you.